respect for, I don't know if there is a non-French speaker, and also I think it's a better training for me. I'm going to have a presentation in Germany soon, so it's going to be a good training and a good example also for students and postdoc to come also and present their research in potentially in English. That was the idea. So today I'm going to be talking about what I've been working on for the last 3 years. So since I've been hired at the CBGP CIRAD, and I should maybe like this, j'ai compris, about forecasting the risk of a locust outbreak using mostly machine learning and agent-based modeling. And so this is the common work with Cyril Pugh. How can I take this? Si tu cliques dessus. Je clique dessus. Non. Anyway, so Cyril, Esther, Elodie, and our collaborator from Senegal, Mamour Touré. And I think there has been a lot of movement in Senegal lately. And Ariane Sees and Mohamed Lemin. So, as you all know, locusts are part of the Orthoptera order. So they are associated to the grasshoppers, but they have this particularity to be able to change their behavior, their morphology, to change also color and physiology depending on the local density and some environmental condition. So they are able to switch from a solitary phase to a gregarious phase. And that's when they are able to form those huge swarms of billions of individuals that can span on 100 kilometers. And so they are known as the desert locust, is known as the 8th plague of Egypt. And when they have invasive plague, they're gonna devastate all the crops on their way. And in 2003, 2005, there has been a huge crisis in West Africa that has cost more than $400 million of damage, and the international aid is to control the plague. And more recently, in East Africa, in 2019, 2021, there has been another crisis in Somalia, Ethiopia, that according to the World Bank has probably would have costed 2.5 billion. Like if we include all the unemployment it would have caused and all the different economic cascade, if there was no, if the food or International Food or Agricultural Organization would have not controlled the crisis on time. So in order to really, so there is like huge, big economical and for food security at stake. And so in order to really prevent those crises, it is really important to be able to forecast what is the risk of the species to occur and to change phase and in order to anticipate outbreaks. So for this, we have different type of tools. And so yeah, behind the concept of risk, there is always the idea of, the risk is really depend on two different type of processes. The uncertainty that an undesirable outcome will occur and is going to affect and negatively impact an objective that we aim to reach. So there is like behind the notion of risk, there is always the uncertainty, the notion of the concept of uncertainty and objectives. So in the objective, regarding the objective in the locust context, we have this fundamental goal which is to save, to maintain a safe agricultural production while minimizing the risk on the environment. So we want to avoid the risk of that a plague can cause on the environment, but also by spreading pesticides on millions of hectares. This is really what we want to avoid. So this is really the fundamental goals. From there, we can define the means objectives by which we can reach this fundamental goal, which is obviously there are two existing different approach in monitoring and management. The first one is regards the monitor, like at an early warning stage, we're going to be interested in detecting the solitarious individual population at a more local stage to really, so this is the preventive management, which is really anticipating the transition before they transit to a transient gregarious phase. If this has been overlooked, we may already be bands like hoppers can be already having those marching bands, or some adults, flying adults, can already form swarms. And in that case, we switch to a more proactive management approach, which requires more urgent and global decisions. So another means, in order to coordinate the more optimal way this monitoring and management approach, we have other tools, other means, which is a lab and modeling approach. No ways.
Si tu essayes sur le côté.
Je pense que c'est dans plus. Dans plus, tu dois avoir un truc pour faire disparaître la barre.
Désactiver les noms.
Masquer la. Ouais, c'est ça, masquer les vidéos. Non, c'est good. Ça, oui.
Voilà. I think it's okay now. Everyone still see. So yeah, so the other means are obviously the model and the lab experiment that we can undertake, and that are here as supporting tools to provide to managers and field experts when they're going to make their decision in the field to prospect and take decisions, preventive or proactive decisions. So as I said, behind the notion of risk, there is always also the idea of uncertainty that is going to impede each of these objectives at each level. So in regarding the model, we have what we called the structural, we have the structural uncertainty. So this is related to the fact that all models are wrong. There's always some sort of, we're never going to be able with the model to encompass all the complexity of the system we want to describe. Then there's going to be also this sampling uncertainty, which is related to the fact that we are not going to be able to detect all the individual in the population. There's always some monitoring, depends on the monitoring effort and on the many different ecological barrier or insecurity. The monitoring is going to be very heterogeneous. There's going to be also what we call control uncertainty, related to also the fact that when we recommend a certain management strategy, sometimes we're also not going to be able to really apply the full recommendation due to lack of funding, motivation from managers, or also insecurity problem and all those things. And at another level, more environmental level, we have to deal also with demographic stochasticity, climate change. And at a bigger level, we have what we call the institutional and governance uncertainty, because even institutions who make decisions themselves are often don't have very clear objective goal, which makes the full decision process quite uncertain. So regarding this conjunction of objectives and uncertainty, we can define also different level of risk that we want to forecast. So at an individual level, and this is what the lab is really useful by doing experiments, we can assess what are the risks that individual change behavior or physiology depending on different controlling factors. At a population level, we can define the risk of presence within a different type of habitat that may be suitable or not for the population, for the species. Then we can define also the level of gregarization risk of breeding sites that is going to lead to the risk of outbreak, and assessing in order to better assess the risk it will have on the agricultural production, and to better assess the threats on food security, on biodiversity, and what will be the economic cost. And so then who is doing all these is we are like a team in the CDGP at the CIRAD. I didn't have enough space to put everyone but we are all working on each of these basically risk level. And today I'm going to be talking mostly what I've been working on the last 3 years, which are these, first of all, assessing the risk of occurrence of the desert locust for preventive management purpose. And another project assessing the outbreaks of Senegalese grasshoppers, which are not considered as locusts, but they have a tendency, a very quite strong tendency of phase polyphenism. And what are the impact of those outbreaks on the agricultural productions in Senegal? So that's the idea of the talk today. And so the first part is going to be using machine learning to predict the presence-absence of desert locusts. So it's a collaboration with Elodie Fernandez and Cyril Pugh. And we have been using, so in the purpose of strengthening the preventive management that is going on in different countries in Africa, and to better strengthen this. And we're using machine learning, and we're going to be also mostly focusing on structural uncertainty, even though those machine learning algorithms account implicitly for different forms of uncertainty. They are not able to, to tease apart which uncertainty is where it's occurring and what's the relative contribution of each. But for sure, it accounts for what we call structural uncertainty by using different machine learning algorithm and also different doing a hyperparameter optimization, where we are going to account for that. Okay, so just a quick, before going to the modeling process, a quick overview of a little bit of biology of the desert locust life cycle. So at an embryonic stage, the desert locust the female can lay 3 times, 3 different, 3 eggs. And at each egg, there is about 30 to 140 eggs. And after 10 days to 60 days, they're going to hatch, and then they're going to go through 5 different larva stage. So this, I'm representing here only the gregarious cycle, but you may know that at each of these stage, even at the embryonic stage, they can switch from solitarious to gregarious. So there is really a lot of plasticity. And when they are solitarious, it's also interesting to know that there is one less larva stage. So another, then they go through immature stage where they can fly. They are adults, but they are not yet able to reproduce. And what is also interesting in Schistocerca gregaria is that they can, depending on if the environmental conditions are really quite harsh, they can stay up to 6 months into diapause, an adult diapause, and wait for better condition to then breed and reproduce. So they form those huge legs where males are regrouped are grouped in those legs, and then when the female is ovipositating, it can last also more than a day. So, of course, all of these stages are going to depend the speed of development and things like that depends on different environmental factors. And also the switch from solitarious to gregarious depends mostly on density. So even though we took all the data from the Agricultural Food Organization, and even though in the field they do report the different observation of some stage, if they are solitarious or if they are at the hopper stage or adult stage, but these data is quite ambiguous. Like they are full of uncertainty, and so at a first stage we just wanted to predict presence absence, just assuming that any observation at whether it's the adult or hopper stage, and under which condition we find them as a first part. So we're just gonna switch to this the machine learning process, where we took all the observation collected from 10 different countries in West Africa and West Africa, And we associated them to different environmental variables, which are basically extracted from remote sensing from MODI satellite. And then we split this full data set into a trained data set, 80% of it, and the remaining, the 20%, will be the test data set. So then there is the step of the training step, which consists of applying different machine learning or algorithm to this trained data set, to do some optimization, hyperparameter optimization procedure. And then once we have the trained model, we can again use the test data set. So basically just pretending we don't know the outcome, the response variable, just using the feature and use those trained models to predict what are going to be the outcome and compare, because since we know the results, we have the reality, we can then compare compare the prediction from the real observation and get performance index based on accuracy or AUC in order to really assess the predictive power of each of our machine learning algorithm. Then there is the step of looking at the importance of variable to select the most important features using Gini or permutation methods. And then the last step consists of the forecasting, which consists of using new data, so new satellite data from the most recent satellite update, and with the selected model, we can predict and forecast what are going to be the future distribution in the next 10 days or 20 days or 1 month. I will show you. So we have 10 different countries: Mauritania, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Mali, Chad, Senegal, Burkina Faso. And we basically we decided to overlap a huge grid of 12 million sites, more than 12 million sites of 1 by 1 kilometer cell. And we aggregate all the observation we had from 2003 to 2023. We aggregate them into those 1 kilometer square sites every 10 days. So in total, we had more than 36,000 presence observation and 63,284 absences. So now regarding the explanatory variable, we mostly use we extract these predictors from remote sensing. There was one variable that we called that was used to represent spatial autocorrelation, which consists of also looking at what's going to be the total number of observation in a 1 kilometer buffer, in order to account for especially in the locust context, since we know that density matters in switching the transition. So we want to also, it was a way to also represent somehow the population, some type of like a population dynamic processes, which is quite difficult with these algorithms. Then we looked at a static variable, so uniform ecological units that were defined by Michel Lecoq in the 90s. The percentage of sand cover at 5 to 15 centimeter deep. So this corresponds to the depth where female lay their eggs, but also it's also at this stage where the roots of the plants is going to develop, and it's quite important indicator of potential for vegetation growth. We also looked at the minimum and maximum vegetation index. So at each site, what is going to be the minimum amount of cover of vegetation during the full period, so from 2003 to 2020. And finally, we had also, it's not moving. Well, that's a shame. I had a lot of gear to show you, but so it's supposed to be dynamic and to move over time. So we looked at a different variable of vegetation index, land surface temperature, soil moisture, rain, precipitation, and the net primary productivity, which gives you an idea of the amount of dioxide, carbon, CO2 that is absorbed by the plants. So basically, each observation is associated to 10 different values of each of these variables, which so the NDVI at the first when the prospection occurs, but also 10 days before, 1 decade before, 20 days before, 2 decades before, until 10 decades in the past. So the idea here is to associate also each of these observations to what was going on in the past, to better assess at which, if there is a time window that is really important in predicting in the future what is the highest chance to see and to how to find locust. So the next step are the training and the evaluation. So I'm going to go very fast. I'm not going to go too much into the details, but as some of you may know, there are many different types of machine learning algorithms. So since all our data is labeled, we only looked at a supervised algorithm. So we looked at logistic regression, ensemble methods, so a random forest, which consists of constructing many different decision trees that are going to be completely independent between each other. And there are going to be some hyperparameter, such as the number of variables that are completely randomly selected. And these parameters, or the depth of the tree, the number of nodes, all these parameters are also important. This is what I was talking about, structural uncertainty, are going to be important in, optimizing the full process. We also use XGBoost, which is another type of ensemble method based on trees, but they are not going to be independent between each other. At each next tree, there's going to be a correction of the bias between prediction to correct the bias. Support vector machine, which consists to find some kind of optimal hyperplane in order to separate the different classes. And neural network, which you have also probably heard a lot, which basically reproduce more or less what's going on in our brain. So we have neurons, and we associate each of our, all the features to different nodes with randomly weights that are assigned to each of the connections that are randomly assigned. That gives you an outcome, and then there is a feedback process until the point where we really minimize the bias. So this is what we explored, those five different algorithms. So again, taking all the present substance observation associated to the 53 variables that I showed you, the dynamic and the static ones. And we use accuracy to determine, so we did the cross-validation and hyperparameter tuning to discriminate which one would be the best type of algorithm. So I must confess that I didn't go very deep in the neural network, and probably I could have got better results, but I really struggle with the hyperparameter tuning. So I end up doing it more or less by hand. But all the rest was done with the TD model package, and in the end, the random forest was showing the better results. So we just decided to stick with this type of algorithm. And we use recursive feature elimination with the carrot package to basically determine what are if we should keep all the variables. And so the full model with everything that we put inside were the best, the one showing the highest AUC. So with the spatial autocorrelation, the season, the static variable, the dynamic variable, so the values of the vegetation index on moisture, land surface temperature at each of these decades. But unfortunately, this type of model is not operational. So even if theoretically, it has a good predictive power, we're not going to be able to use it in an automatization chain in order to predict what's going to be occurring in the next months, because we're not going to be able to have all these satellite data on time to update them and to make the forecast on time for the managers. So we had to, so yeah, this is the AUC, just to show you the relationship between sensitivity, so the true positive as a function of the false positive rate. And it's basically a performance indicator to explain how good your model is in predicting presence and absence. So we looked in a more operational purpose. We looked at what's going on, what would be the performance of each of these models using AUC index. With what we are sure will be available on time if we want to do an automatization process. So we just kept the static variable, the vegetation and index, land surface temperature from a MODIS satellite, and the precipitation from the Institute of British Columbia. And but we still had to remove the first to the current decade and also the one just before, because there's always a lapse between update and what is online. Then we use a second model with again a little bit of delay. So we removed the first and the second last decade, and a third model where we removed the first, the first, the second, and the third decade. But they all had an AUC above 0.7, which is considered in the literature as acceptable in terms of predictive power. Then we can also look at variable importance using a feature permutation, I think, where we randomly shuffle each feature and see what's going to be how much we lose in terms of information with the model. And so the ecological units are the one that are the most important. So those that was defining different type of biotope by Michel Lecoq. This was the map, the static map. The sand, so basically the static variable are quite the most important. So that's actually very easy. Well, that's better. Minimum NDVI is a good indicator also for, how do you say, vegetation pérenne, permanent vegetation. So it is going to give you the idea of sites where if there is like a minimum vegetation index during the full study area, it means that there is always vegetation. Whereas in the desert, most of the sites are quite patchy. So you will have moments where you have really zero NDVI. And the recent vegetation index is really important, as well as the last decade vegetation index, but also the surface temperature at different decades. So we use accumulated local effects then to also look. So this can also give us some idea of the relationship between this variable and the probability of presence. So the habitat that was really having a positive effect on the locust distribution is really this was, so yeah, it basically corresponds to the Sahelian belt. Then if we looked at the sand, you will see that it's there is some kind of optimal maximum peak around 63-65%, where we have the highest chance to see locust. Minimum NDVI, so here we have a positive effect at very low minimum NDVI, even at 0, meaning that this also confirmed the fact that they like patchy habitat, where like at some point in the year, there's not going to be any vegetation, only sand, so with a 0 minimum NDVI. And regarding the temporal dynamic relationship, like really long time in advance, so 3 months before prospection, there is a negative relationship between vegetation and presence. So they prefer, again, very dry habitats, but that have the capacity to vegetate quite fast and in a recent window. And that's when there's going to start to to aggregate and to develop and have food in order to have their whole life cycle. So it's just confirming that it's a species very well adapted to dry habitat, but which has the ability to grow vegetation quite fast, but in a very patchy structure. So then goes the forecasting step, which, as I said, consists of applying new satellite image and use the selected model to predict what are going to be the outcome in terms of presence, absence, and generate the forecasting maps. So this is mostly also a lot in collaboration with Elodie Fernandez. Sorry, I'm having a memory issue. So she has been working on this on Python on building an automatization chain, which consists on a daily basis. Well, no, on a monthly basis, updating the most recent maps, satellite maps, apply the selected best model from random forest, and then generate the forecasting maps with those three models that I show you that are operational. The one that we're removing the last decade, which allows you to make a prediction of what's going on in the 10th first day. The one that we're removing the first and the second decade. And in that case, you can predict further away, so 20 days up to 20 days. And the one removing the 3 last decade, allowing to make a prediction 1 month ahead. And then as times goes by, we can, when there is another decade going through, we can update with the better, like this was the better model. So we can update the map for the next decade and also make a forecast the next month, etc., etc. So this is what this is. So this is not moving either. Too bad. And so yeah, well, it was just to show you an example how it's changed over time. And we were not interested in forecasting what's going on in the evasion zones. So these were only the recession zones. And as I said earlier, when I showed you the accumulated local effects plots, it's really this Sahelian belt, where you have the highest probability of detecting them and finding them. And we also plot the observer. So we did like some kind of retrospective validation to see if the model, so because we use AUC, but it's always better to also check. And we find by just comparing the past observation with what the model was predicting in a retrospective way, we had less than 5% false negative, which is really what we want to avoid. We want to avoid having to predict the absence when they are actually here. So we prefer to take a more conservative approach in terms of preventive management. So then goes the forecasting map, the forecasting step, where we build an interface. So this is also a lot Elodie who's working on it, who keeps working on it. So there is this interface with leaflet that is updated every 10 days. And Cyril Pugh, last December, he went to the field and he took the prediction map, the predictive map, and he designed a transect, a huge prospection route that was more than 1,500 kilometers. And they defined 58 sites where they looked, they prospect on a 1 kilometer range and looked at for locust. And he find a very good adequation between what the model was forecasting. So what you see, the colors are the forecast. When it's more yellow, it's a high probability of having locust. So there was in total 81% of correct prediction. And what was also interesting is he found also a correlation between density and the probability class, presence class. So the more we had like yellow colors, the higher the density of locusts were found in the field. So that was quite reassuring. And I think we're done for the first part. But the second is going to be quite fast. Because, and yeah, we can go back with the question later. So yeah, to go back to the first frame, the other idea is to also predict what is the risk of outbreak, locust outbreak, and for this we believe that it's much more important we need to account for demographic and dynamic population dynamics, which machine learning is that's the inconvenient. It's fully like random forests are fully random, so we're not reproducing anything in terms of ecological process, which is sometimes really boring for me, basically. And with the agent-based model, it's really nice because we can really reproduce the full cycle, the population, and predict what is going to be the risk of outbreaks. But sometimes it's like we lack of validation with field data. That's the inconvenience. As I said, so this is the project of Esther that is taking over now. And so as I said, the beauty of agent-based model is we can reproduce from the individual processes. So we looked at what's going on in terms of behavior and nutrition with using a nutritional geometric framework. I will go back with it later. We can represent processes at higher scale at the population level, the gregarization, and then represent what are going to be the different population dynamic outbreaks. And we can even apply an economic, a cost benefits analysis, which was the work of the recent work of Esther. So it's a very integrative approach. So we built this agent-based model linking, as I said, the nutritional ecology with the population dynamics of Senegalese locust, Senegalese grasshopper. They are not really locust, I remind you. And the idea was to see if what is the risk of outbreaks on the crop damage, and also if different agricultural practices such as soil amendment by fertilizing the soil. We want to see if it can be used as a controlling strategy. So why soil amendment would be efficient? I will explain you later. So first, the life cycle. So we have the life cycle of the Senegalese grasshopper, which what is interesting compared to the desert locust is that the diapause is at an egg stage. So they can stay 6 months into diapause at the egg stage. Then they also have the 5 different stage larva stage. There is a huge dimorphism between male and female. And so they stay green, solitarious phase when at very low density. And when they reach a density above 1,000 individual adults per hectare, they tend to switch color and to have this type of gregarious behavior. But they are not really they are not really considered as locusts. And of course, once again, all this depends on environmental condition, but mostly also on the vegetation composition in terms of vegetation in terms of biomass, but also the qualitative, the quality of the vegetation in terms of carbohydrates, protein. So because it's also acknowledged that contradictory to many other herbivores, locusts, they need a lot of carbs, much more carbs than proteins. This is in order to do these long migration flights. So they tend to prefer, like if we looked at a nutritional geometric framework here, so this is a theoretical framework which is based mostly on trigonometry, which define a certain optimal point of carbs versus protein that each individual is supposed to ingest in order to optimize their fitness. So the locust, most of the locusts, and especially at least the Senegalese grasshopper, it has been proven that they like carbs. This was from lab experiment. So what we did is we represented different type of food for the Senegalese grasshopper, which has different ratios of carbs and protein. So the fallow field, the millet, which has high carbs, and foods that are low, that are more protein-rich type of food, which is groundnut and grassland. And we also represented the Senegal landscape from south to north, but only on a 100-kilometer wide, only 100-kilometer wide landscape, because we are mostly interested in what's going on in a latitude, coordinates, since the population, it tends to follow the intertropical convergence zone. So yeah, I think this is mostly how the model looks like. And yeah, so the idea is when we fertilize the soil, this is going to reduce the ratio, the slope of the food rail of millet towards a more protein-based biased type of food. And so the idea is by changing this food rail is the locust, the grasshopper, Senegalese grasshopper is going to switch and change its diet. So just very quickly, in terms of the different processes that we represent in the model. So in each patch, the individual has a certain probability to find food, which depends on the biomass available, but also on competition. Then if it has found food, it's going to reduce the biomass, logical, but it's also going to update its nutritional states by moving forwards within this framework. And by updating its nutritional states, it's going to also optimize or not its fitness, right? And the fitness also depends on the other factors, so predation and environmental variable. Then they can migrate depending on the wind direction, and they can also disperse. So the dispersal is the last thing that is quite important, because so on a local scale, they can switch and go to the neighbor sites, depending on two different factors. First, the density within neighboring patch. So basically, meaning that, okay, maybe if all my buddies are here, it probably means that the food is quite good, but actually I don't know. So it's kind of a social processes, but also it depends on, of course, on the composition, and how if the individual is probably going to follow what his conspecific are doing, or if he's going to be concentrating in mostly choosing a food that is going to optimize his own intake target. And so this is what's going on a local sketch, but of course, it's each individual make those decisions all along the landscape, the Senegal landscape, in 3 different zones. So yeah, so this was the actual from the land cover Landsat map. But of course, we didn't have any idea of what type of cultivated field. So we use Landsat to determine the grassland and water and cultivated field. But for the cultivated field, we looked at as a rotation type of strategy, as if there were millet, groundnut, and fallow, and they can potentially rotate. But this is not really the truth. Huh? But the idea is basically to try to calibrate. So we calibrate the model with above ground biomass and from a yield data on millet. That was a collaboration with Jérémy Lavarenne from Tétis, using another agronomic model to represent the biomass dynamic of each field. And now the idea is to reproduce patterns of density of the population abundance within each of these zones, following these intertropical convergence zones. But the problem is, like, we only have from the literature, we mostly have simulated data as well. This figure that we may want to reproduce is also from a simulated model. So what we are in terms of model calibration using pattern-oriented modeling. So this is the current work of Esther. We are trying to basically explore many different, so there are some parameters that are fixed, and those for which we have no idea, we don't have any information from the literature. Those we're gonna basically explore many scenarios for different type of values, and try to find for which value we are able to reproduce the observed patterns. So observed patterns are collected from Mamour Touré. It was in a project in 2022 when more or less when I arrived, where he selected 50 plots in the south in zone 1, 50 plots in zone 2 in the middle, and 50 plots in the north. And he just did some transect and counted the number of grasshoppers found. And now, so here in the pink, you have the observed distribution of abundance. And what we are doing is we explore many different scenarios with different values of parameter values to try to at least that the simulation distribution overlap somehow with the observed one. It's not really perfect at all, but so far we have not managed to do better than that. So we have certain criteria to try to really see which scenario are the best. And what we found is that mostly it is sensitive to the initial condition we put in the model, the initial population states. We have better results when we also use a later migration date, much later. That's actually what was found in the biomodel from the 70s. But all this is also related to climate change. So that's the thing also we need to think that everything we are reproducing from past model is probably no longer available. With a small migration capacity and also narrow, so the ability of individual to orientate depending on the wind, like how, even if the wind is going north, how able they are to basically counteract the wind direction, let's say. And then it was quite robust to mostly to the cohesion factor, the thing that somehow relates them to the gregarious when they switch and becomes more gregarious. And it was also quite robust to competition. So no matter what value we were putting for this, it didn't really change, at least in terms of reproducing the outcomes getting closer to the observed. And yeah, so these are just preliminary results, but that's basically just not to show anything, to show you something at the end, because this is not, we have not finished validating, so we don't even know yet if there is really an effect. But from last year, when I started doing this model without validating and calibrating as well as Esther is doing, I just to check if there was an effect, I looked at what would be the density, the total abundance as a percentage of a field, millet field that were receiving soil amendment. And even though there is still a really quite high population abundance, there is still at least a decline, so some effects. And it also can help somehow to reduce a little bit the crop damage. But this is really to be cautious, because that was really, the model has really changed since then. So yeah, just to finish, the next step is basically to look at what's going to be going on in the. So I showed you these example and this example, and the next stage is now to try to see, to predict the transition between solitarious and gregarious phase. And the idea would be to use not machine learning and not agent-based model, but hidden Markov model, or a hierarchical Bayesian model, or state space model. There are different, they can give different names for more or less the same thing. But the idea would be to really represent more what's going on in terms of to separate the ecological processes and get a better idea of the transition, the probability of transition between the solitarious and gregarious stage, while accounting for sampling uncertainty and controlling uncertainty. So that's a project that I'm starting, that I was starting with a PhD, but he abandoned me. And so, but I started doing it a little bit by myself, and we have some results interesting, but the idea would be to make a full project. So yeah, and just to conclude, which model for depending on the aggregate situation and depending on some tools are better than others. So when it consists of predicting and forecasting the occurrence and at least the aggregation in some zones, in a purpose of surveillance and preventive management, machine learning was quite good. But and also even if we apply at a more regional scale. But then if we want to really be interested in what's going on at the population level with the change in terms of gregarization, we believe that it's more important to also account for more other type of model, so the hidden Markov model, separating ecology from observation processes. And then at a more agro-ecosystem scale, of course, agent-based models are very useful, and even if we want to include climate change, so I invite you to come and see the PhD of Fanny soon, because this is exactly what she's using. She's at this level. And of course, we can also include the economic component with these agent-based models. So that's more or less. So yeah. Just to conclude, we know that remote sensing and machine learning are powerful tools, but we need to be careful. They just provide an idea of what's the probability of detecting. Like during all the talk, I've been talking about presence and absence, but it's actually the probability of finding them, right? So we can use them to orientate the team in the field to strengthen the preventive management. But we also, when I applied, because I didn't tell you, but I tried to apply these the random forest and some other algorithm to predict gregarious, to discriminate between gregarious and solitarious. And it was a total failure so far, very low predictive accuracy and AUC. So we think that for instance, what did Sophie Véran in the past would be probably better. And which would be consisting in accounting for imperfect and heterogeneous detection. So more mechanistic approach are also good, but we need to do pattern-oriented modeling, which is a really tedious task. So we can congratulate Esther for doing all this, because it's quite hard. And the last conclusion would be to really emphasize that ecology and human forces must stay at the heart of locust management, because it's very sexy to machine learning, artificial intelligence, but without the data from the ground, good data from a ground survey, we are never going to be, we can use the most complex model, we will never be able to do anything. So that's it.